Good morning. You know, when I moved up here from Texas, the first time I'll never forget that, you know, in Texas, where I'm from in Texas, we have summer and summer light. Y'all have 4 seasons, which is pretty amazing. In fact, my brother and I was just having lunch with him a couple of days ago. We said what we liked about living on the East Coast, and we both agreed it had 4 seasons. We weren't raised with 4 seasons. I always think of May and June as textbook of what I think springtime should look like, right? Just so gorgeous up here. The blooming flowers, all the trees. You have trees that bloom that we have more up here than I've ever seen in my entire life when I came up here. And I was just blown away by the amount of color and by the fragrance. I'm staying at a place that has gardenia trees, I think they are. And you could smell them for the first mile as I'm driving up to this place. And it's just so amazing. It's so gorgeous. And it just makes me so happy to see on a bright spring morning and all this kind of stuff that's going on. So I want to do just some brief opening words because we got a lot going on today. But this is actually a romantic poet by the name of Arthur Symons. It was written about the 1800s. And I think it captures, for a lot of us as we get older, thinking about nature around us, and especially spring. He says, amends to nature. I have loved colors and not flowers, their motion, not their swallow's wings, and wasted more than half of my hours without the camaradereship of things. How is it now that I can see with love and wonder and delight the children of the hedge and tree, the little lords of day and night? How is it that I see the roads no longer with usurping eyes, a twilight meeting place for toads, a midday mart for butterflies? I feel in every midge that hums, life fugitive and infinite, and suddenly the world becomes a part of me and I of it. And I think that's a lovely way to cast off the start of spring and also to think about communities and how we connect not only to broader communities, but the circle that we're building here and feeling a part of that pulse of life and finding ways to keep that pulse of life going, to make sure it's thriving, to make sure it's not self-destructive and all the other things that we can also do and have a tendency to do. And what it talks about in the poem is that as he got older, he finally started noticing that there are other things that exist in the world around him and feeling a kinship with the rest of nature and how important that is.
Now, with that said, we're going to move into our presentation today with our leader, Curt Collier. Almost all of you, I think, know him pretty well. He's been a leader for, I won't say the exact number of years because I don't think I know the exact number of years, but I would say at least 3 decades. You've led different societies around the country. Riverdale Yonkers, the New York Society for Ethical Culture, and others. And we're so lucky to have a person of his wide versatility and not just intelligence, but really human emotional intelligence, which is another type of intelligence that we appreciate here. And so without further ado, I introduce our leader, Curt Collier.
When I used to be in music, I would get overwhelmed also each time. And I think I'm surprised that musicians can play such beautiful things and get so engrossed in the music and not get overwhelmed by it. And so I certainly can understand that. I also have the pleasure of being a consultant leader with the Silicon Valley Ethical Society. So I just flew back from Palo Alto, California, actually a couple of days ago, where I've been doing some work out there. It's a very, very different kind of group out there. It's because it's when I ask who's in the industry, everybody raises their hand. Everybody there is either in the computer industry of some sort of connection like that. Their president is a metallurgist who worked on that, or they're a psychologist working with help these people with the work that they do. But I gave a presentation there on AI just recently, and there were 3 women in the front row who said they appreciated it, were very excited about what I had to say, thought it was really great. One asked me to help consult with her on her book, And then I discovered that they all have PhDs in artificial intelligence. And I thought, wow, I must have said something right somehow. But it's an interesting, very, very interesting topic because of the fact that our world is going to change pretty extensively with AI in the next few decades even. You know, when I was at my former job with Groundwork, I heard from the Department of Labor that about 30% of current jobs would be gone within a few decades because of the rapid changes in artificial intelligence. And now some people think that it may be up to 60% of jobs in the United States will eventually be taken over by artificial intelligence. It's hard to believe that until you listen to all these experts out in California and the types of technologies that they're working for. I had dinner with a young lady, and she said, "Do you see my ring?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Well, it's monitoring my menstrual cycle, my blood pressure, and all this kind of stuff, because they're doing research on me as a test candidate, and this ring monitors everything through the satellites." I'm like, how on earth does that even possibly happen? My ring just spins in circles and is really pretty, and I got it in Ireland, so that's all I can do with mine. But years ago, I remember reading Mary Doria Russell. Anyone a fan of science fiction, her writing, or heard of her? Kind of a more obscure person. Most people may have heard of Ursula Le Guin. Does anyone know that name? Yeah, Ursula Le Guin, of course, was a pretty prominent science fiction writer, and she inspired Mary Doria Russell to write her book. Mary Doria Russell was a paleobiologist herself, and that was her research, and went into this and brings a lot of that kind of deep science, which is for people like me who are science nerds, can deeply appreciate those kinds of stuff. But she wrote a book called The Sparrow in 1996. And in 1996, there was a character named Sophia Mendez in the story. And it's a story that on Earth, we got a signal finally from a distant planet. And we could tell this because it was making this, which the scientists eventually figured out was a type of music that was being heard. And so a group of Jesuits got together, and they wanted to be the first, you know, like they often are as colonists, to be the first to get to the planet, but also to kind of study what they knew, and did they know anything about God, and all these bigger, broader questions, supposedly. So, but they hired a group of scientists to send them there and send some Jesuit priests. And I won't give away too much of the novel. It doesn't end well, just should say that, for a lot of different reasons that are unexpected. But one character, Sophia Mendez, was brought there because of her ability to think through human processing. How do you make sense of the world? So there was this brilliant scientist, and they hired Sophia to follow him around and for him to speak out loud all of his thought processes, and she'd write them down and then program that into artificial intelligence to make AI as smart as she was. Now, this is 1996 that we had done this. Artificial intelligence, as you know, has been around for a long time. 1956, researchers and computer scientists that early started to kind of figure out what it is and what it could do. If you remember, Deep Blue was developed to actually challenge people in chess. They had a contest with Garry Kasparov in 1989, and Garry Kasparov beat the computer in 1989. But there's an interesting law in computer called Moore's Law, which means the speed of chips doubles every 2 years. In fact, I was just in the Computer Science Museum studying this and looking. They have a great museum if you're ever out in Palo Alto. And it shows the trajectory of computer intelligence, which is skyrocketing. Skyrocketing. Think about that. If cars had been developed in the same way computers are, we'd all be in flying cars at this point, which could travel at different speed and then bake cakes along the way so we could arrive with something in a dessert for someone else. But then again, they brought back, so that was in 1989 that Garry Kasparov beat Deep Blue. By 1997, they had the second challenge, of course, and Garry Kasparov lost to Deep Blue, and no one has ever beat a computer since. So chess, its ability to calculate, got faster and faster, running millions of permutations of the chessboard and all this kind of stuff, and we've never been able to beat a computer since then. In February 2011, some of you remember Watson on the Jeopardy. Did anybody watch that show? Where they had two challenges against a computer, and the computer, Watson from IBM, was supposed to be able to do this. Who won the contest? Watson won, the computer won, right? So it's gotten to that point. So we tend to think of AI as doing that kind of stuff, doing permutations of facts and figures and calculating at rapid speeds. But actually, it's not those, the scientists say. And luckily, those 3 PhDs clarified for me. You can't ask an AI computer, what is 2 plus 2? It doesn't know the answer to that. Believe it or not. It really, what it knows though, is it knows from these millions of responses basically what the pattern is, and the pattern is it can say it's 4 because it only tries to figure out what that is. But there's not really that kind of computation that it gets used for. And I'll let our resident computer scientist Paolo correct me on that a little bit later on as I introduce this. But it's what computer science and artificial intelligence is based on is something called machine learning. And we tend to think of machine learning in 2 broad kind of categories. The first is called supervised, and the second is called unsupervised. It's supervised. Imagine you've got a robot with a set of arrows, and we say we want you to hit that target, and that target way over there. And every time the computer shoots and makes shots to the targets, there is an optimization software, and it's constantly making adjustments. It's figuring out what it needs to do to hit that. And each time, oh, I was too short, a little further, I'm going to change this. And it keeps making modifications until boom, 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 right in the center of the target every single time. That's kind of the supervised learning that we think AI is very, very good at it. And it is very, very good at doing those kinds of things. However, unsupervised is much more interesting. Unsupervised learning is where the computer has no targets. It's just said, there's a bunch of arrows and there's a bow, shoot them, and tell us what you know about that. It's called unsupervised. There's no targets. And basically, it's all, by the way, just crunching large amounts of data. And what it figured out is that, yes, some ways I could shoot can go there, some ways I could shoot there. Some of these should not even been used by arrows. They're broken. Some are only good for hitting the house. And why does that target matter? Why did I not focus my direction this way? And what do I need to do? And suddenly, what AI can do is it can find out all of these other patterns that exist out there, right? These ways of thinking and ways of being, even that the researchers didn't think about, and is looking at the data is like, wow, that's unique. Why did you see that? What is the new pattern? So AI can actually, without even targets, see patterns that exist out there in the universe without we would even know have existed, right? It just keeps doing this and processing massive amounts of data. Everything about you, where you drove to. I recently renewed with Geico, and the woman says, oh, do you want us to have this thing with your insurance company for your automobile insurance, and it'll basically see how you drive, and we can adjust your driver's insurance, and it could be cheaper if you're a safe driver. And I thought, well, is that one of those things you plug into your car? Because you've probably seen that. And she goes, oh, no, you just have your phone with you. I'm like, hell no. What do you mean you know where I'm going, what I'm doing? Am I moving in a car? Am I riding a bicycle? I mean, what can it do? But obviously, AI can crunch that ability of information. And that may be the future too, where your boss says, oh, you need to wear this implant because we know, are you keeping yourself healthy? What are you doing if we're going to insure you? Or what kind of work are you doing? What are you resting? What are your cycles like? And all this kind of stuff, and figure these things out which is the reason why people get very upset about this. Now, the thing about humans is we go, well, they'll never be able to figure us out. We're so different, we're so wild, even if they have vast amounts of data, where you shop, what you look at. Every time you click, by the way, you're filling in a form for them on the computer. When you shop, when you search, when you linger on the page for 2 seconds as opposed to 2.5 seconds, all those things are now being part of the data that's following everything about. And in fact, if your camera was on, and maybe it is, it's tracking even your eye movements. They can even tell where you look at that. Yuval Noah Harari did the research where the computer figured out he was gay, he said, before he did. before he fully knew, because of where his eyes lingered and where his eyes moved and those kinds of stuff, and all these things. And imagine being able to say to you, well, you know, you're probably gay because you know, no one stares that long at someone in those deep, dark pool of eyes that you have, Jerry. Look at them right in the front row, you know. So it's amassing massive amounts of data about you. And so, but people say, no, humans are, you know, we're far more difficult to figure out, that you know, that's not a thing. I tell you, look at neuroscientists, and neuroscientists say, not so fast. In fact, we operate with hundreds of cognitive biases, in fact, all the time. So for example, they say we have something called a confirmation bias, which is that I tend to look for information that confirms or agrees with my view of the world, right? I gravitate towards things which I already hold to be true, and therefore I am biased towards that information and select that type of information. I also have a hindsight bias, which means that I think I know better about my child. Oh, I knew the Yankees were going to beat the whomever. I don't even know sports. They were going to beat them, and we always say that we know better. Are we sure why that happened or why these things happen, when it actually was all far more random than we ever thought it was. We also have, of course, a lot of anchoring bias, which is an interesting phenomena, that the first piece of information that we get, we tend to follow that information, even if new information comes along. The other one is anchored into our brain, and we tend to say, no, that must be the reason why, which is why it's so hard to get people to kind of change their ideas about things, even as new and better information comes along. There are a lot of self-serving biases. I would say that one of the reasons why I told them that I was not as good as a drummer, because I read a drumming circle, as they were, is that I had jet lag and I was the playing. But the reason why you're not a good drummer is that you're just not a good drummer, right? Where we tend to blame external things for our own bad behaviors, and we tend to blame internal forces into other people rather than seeing those things as exactly the same. We also have kind of the halo effect, that sometimes I am so enamored by someone like Eric that no matter what he says, even if he's completely wrong, I may lend more information to him, right? Biden can do no wrong, Trump can do no good. And then therefore anything that comes out of their mouth, I'm heavily influenced by that type of bias. And there are a number of those. There are another of false consensus, where I think you're all in exact agreement with me, even though there's no truth for that. That I think that people tend to agree with me, or humans tend to agree with each other more so than they actually ever do. We also have another type of value called the availability heuristic. I hear of 3 arguments or 3 things that happen in my neighborhood. 3 people may have gotten hurt or robbed, and then I think the entire neighborhood is bad, even though I live in a city of 8 million people and there were only 3 incidents that just happened to be in there, called the availability heuristics. Or another interesting thing called apophenia, which is where we are pattern-seeking animals. I see things that exist in the universe to believe to be true, even when they don't true. So this morning, while I was looking at my matzah, I saw the picture of the Virgin Mary, so process that. I see things that are not there, even if they're true. And you may be surprised to hear that there's a thing called groupthink, that sometimes even when we're together, humans influence each other's thinking. That was the interesting experiment where they had 3 people who were actually, they were shills in this experiment. And basically they were said, how many lights do you see? And they kept saying 4, when clearly there were just 3 lights. They kept saying 4. Then they asked this other person, how many lights are there? She goes, 4, right? Even though she could clearly see that there were just 3 lights, but how powerful those things are there. So this is the interesting thing. When I'm looking at you and looking at the world, I'm looking through a set of biases, cognitive biases, my past, my history, my class. I used to be able to do something at the ethical societies, is I would look at a group of the statistics of the area and could calculate how many members were a member of that congregation with almost near 100% accuracy. So I could say, oh, in that society, and this is back before all the changes went on, given these demographics, this is probably how many members you have, and it's exactly the number of members that they had. So even our all these kind of other heuristics that we use influence our thinking. So my thing is I'm looking out to you and to the world through these set of biases, these set of patterns out there that are obviously in my blind spot, right? I don't see them. My son was trying to explain to me, he said, Andy was telling me, he was talking about me around persons of color. My son is Dominican, dark skin, and basically he says, did you see how you walked into the room? Did you see how you sat down? Did you see the words you said to that? I'm like, no, what are you talking about? He said, that's your problem. He says, it's like when you were trying to get me to learn how to drive your truck. You said, be careful that there's these huge blind spots and I cannot even see an entire car there. And he says, it's kind of like that. You don't see the way you're in the world because you're not tuned into those things. So the question is, if I'm looking at the world through all of these biases and these heuristics and the things that I do, can a computer spot them? And the answer is absolutely yes. It knows all of these, even if they're blind to you. AI, through crunching your data, can see patterns. Now, it's not going to name them the heuristic bias or the confirmation bias, but it can see the patterns that you do. And what's frightful to many people who are even in the business and who understand heuristics are thinking about, wow, is this going to know me better than I know itself? In which case, every time I turn on my computer is what pops up on the screen really what I want to see of the world, what I need to know about the world, or it's been tailor-made to fit to my ideas. Now, we all know that we're online and we're shopping for shoes, and then we go to our phone and we're walking down and an ad pops up for shoes, right? From a completely different format, different programs, and you go, what the heck? You're like, throw that away, get rid of those things. But that's because the algorithm has already figured it out. My data has been spread around, and other data platforms now can get the same access to the information. And so I had to ask myself, when I turn on the computer, what world am I seeing? Am I seeing the world as it is, or just a confirmation of what I think it is based on my own biases, my own class, my race, my gender, my sexual orientation, all these things that are getting fed to me? And that gets to be a little bit of a problem, because the computer is knowing me perhaps a little bit more than I know myself. Now, you all know Harari is a historian. Is anyone an economist? Anyone know, heard of his book? He wrote a book recently called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and he talks very, very darkly about AI. He says he doesn't mean to. AI will do many wonderful things. I think as an environmentalist, I think it will allow us to live more lightly on the land. But he also thought that if the computer can figure out all this stuff about me, can a demagogue or someone who is an autocrat use the same ability to process the data to control the population? And his answer is absolutely yes. His fearfulness is not, the old class struggle between classical and stuff, but a few people who have access to the data, ability to crunch it, and ability to sway public opinion based solely on that kind of stuff. But you all know Harari also says that's been going on with thousands of years with religion as well. Religion hacks our brains too, right? It feeds us a view of the nature of reality based on how it constructs that, frames it, feeds that, and can get us to do basically anything that we want to do, including mass suicide against one group against another, because the way that it can process our thinking. His example of that is during World War II with Japanese kamikazes, who was an extension of the computer in a way, the group thing, that people could blow up themselves by doing this and surrender their own lives in the service of something much, much bigger. So he says we've been doing this for quite a long period of time through these kind of mass identities we have there. And this is kind of the challenge of AI. AI is a wonderful, fantastic thing. It's going to be able to generate art and music and see new worlds and medicines and all this kind of stuff. But at the meantime, it's not an ethical basis. It doesn't have within it kind of a framework. It basically is just a tool like anything else that we can use out there. Daniel Kahneman, anyone know who that is? Won a Nobel Prize also for economics as a psychologist, wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, if you saw that, or Noise. And Daniel Kahneman, who wrote this book a few years back, it says basically humans have the same problem. We all exist in a world of noise. All this stuff is going on. We're fed lots of data, all these interactions, the things that are going on. And the question is what do you choose to pay attention to? And why did you choose to pay attention to those things and not those things, right? That's why if we're working with computers and things like that, we have to be careful of that going down the rabbit hole, that if it's constantly feeding us with outrage, I click and I click and I click and I click. Next thing, I've spent 2 hours in front of my computers researching something about some obscure politician who said something stupid over in Kansas in the 3rd Congressional District, some crazy little thing like that. And I'm outraged by it and I'm hooked into it and I continue to be fed by those stuff. And so the challenges that we have is that as the more and more that these computers are capable of doing this and processing the information, and basically is already constructing on the computer what it is that you choose to see and how you react, and already knowing, because it sees your biases, how you're going to react, and then feeding you responses based on that. That's a very, very, very tricky thing, right? We find ourselves in kind of a very bad state. Kahneman says, most of us, most of the time, live with unquestioned beliefs about the world. The way the world looks as does, because that's just the way it is, we say. There's one small step from this belief to another. Other people view the world much the same way I do. These beliefs, which have been called naive realism, are essential to the sense of reality we share with other people. We rarely question those beliefs. We hold a single interpretation of the world around us at any single time, and we normally invest very little effort in creating plausible alternatives to it, right? We accept this as the nature of the world, what the computer is giving us, or the group, or the religion, or something like that, a confirmation of that kind of stuff, and we go with it because one interpretation is enough as we experience the truth, which is called the anchoring bias, that we take on a belief. That's all I need to know. Thank you. I've got it done. And then you encounter someone like says, is climate change real or not? They go, absolutely not, because X, Y, and Z. And there's been enough research and enough scientists and enough data out there to say that climate change is real. But they're basically have anchored it within kind of a set of beliefs, and as do I, and which most of us doesn't go for. And algorithms and computers and AIs can be able to do this because it can see this through. Now, Kahneman says we need 2 types of thinking. We need fast thinking because we do need to sort and analyze lots of different information. This morning with the young kids group, I gave them a group of picture cards. This is what I did with the 945 gathering, and basically asked them to sort these cards as quickly as possible into 3 categories. And the 3 categories, they can make up the 3 categories. And the youth all took the cards and they quickly, within less than a minute, sorted all of these disparate cards into various different kinds of groups and pictures and things like that. And then I asked them what it was. Without a doubt, every single one of their categories was exactly right? It is a category. I grouped this based on these are things that people use. These are modes of transportation. They could do this kind of stuff. And I said, can you see the advantages of us processing large amounts of information so quickly like that? And they said, yes, that helps us process. We can understand how I can quickly make assumptions. And then I asked them, what's wrong with that? Or what's the challenge? Not what's wrong with that. What challenge might come out? Or when would this be a bad thing? And finally, Max raised his hand and he said, the problem is that we can categorize people and put them into categories based on what we say in our mind, rather than allowing them to think of them as whole people. In fact, the youth then shared a whole variety of stories about what it's like to be in high school, right, where we quickly group people into categories. Or middle school in their case. Some people are the jocks, the athletic, the popular kids, the nerds, the teachers' pets. They went through this whole category. And I said, what is the problem with that? And they agreed that you can get stuck in that. And they could identify within their own selves. These are young kids, right? Some of these kids are only 9, 10 years old, and they're quickly grasping the problem with that kind of thinking. The question is do we do the same thing, right? As adults, do we grasp the cast of these quick categories are not as serving as we want to? Now, to a certain extent, we need to do that kind of information because it helps us to process that. But it's also important to maintain our sense of unique identity. I mentioned to Nadezhda Michel that when we were talking a second ago about that we don't have a set of beliefs. In fact, it was based on what Felix Adler called organicity. Each one of you has a kind of piece of information about the nature of reality, about what is good, about what ethics is, about how we should thrive and how we should be into the world. And rather for us to prescriptively say, here's how you should think, we think that between all of us, these collective insights can emerge, that it can let us know about the world. One of the challenges that AI has is it focuses too much on individuals and monocultures, right? It thinks it knows you, and it thinks it knows what you want to do. And because you're a member of this set of people, white gay males in their early 60s, certain age kind of stuff, it can make predictions about me. But when I pattern myself or work with a woman of color or a person who's a different working class than I am, and I try to bring those people into my thought process, the more I build an authentic sense of community around myself and get challenged by those norms, such as my son did. AI is not able to capture the types of information, the changes that are happening out of the groups. Felix Adler, when he founded Ethical Culture, basically said, we really care less about a philosophy of the individual and more of a philosophy of the groups. And I think that is kind of something that's going to help us going forward, is the idea that we need much more information that comes out of diverse groups than anything else. Now, some people would stop me and say, well, I think AI can help with lots of things. It can help improve democracy. It can help with prosperity. It can do all these kinds of things. But if you look at the recent research around democracy and prosperity, we get challenged as progressives once again. The model I learned in college is, and since then with my participation in a lot of progressive groups, is that if we can go into an area and we can implement democracy, and if we can implement prosperity, then secularism, openness, inclusion, diversity, all those things will follow. Right? If we just make sure there's democracy, then we can build up these things. The research on that, though, is abysmal. And we have to realize that it's falling apart, and we're witnessing it around the world, which is what shocks us so much. We thought if we just imposed democracy on systems, that those systems would automatically lead to inclusion, diversity, openness, respect for others, secularism, and all this kind of stuff. And the researcher says, well, it's actually the other way around. That the more you focus, foster a love of diversity and inclusion, instead of breaking tribalism, because we could see how democracies can actually still be at war with themselves and slaughter each other, or that we had to focus on inclusion and diversity and actually even secularism and these things about maybe that my interpretation of the world is not the only way the world. And the researchers who did this said, that may be a better formula for democracy emerging and prosperity rather than the other way around. Because we've gone into a lot of places and tried to force in through the bank, the World Bank and other kinds of stuff, the International Monetary Fund, prosperity, or to institute democracy to those places. And many of those places where this continues to go, it's not going well. So rather trying to focus a true sense of community, a true sense of inclusion, which takes skills other than democracy and prosperity can. Now, that's not to say I give up on democracy. I believe that is the salvation for humanity. The question is how do we get to democracies? And their saying is it may be something different than we even anticipated. The problem is when I talk with the researchers, I said many of the skills that this has to do, a spirit of openness, inclusion, and diversity, are the things that artificial intelligence is not designed for and wouldn't do well with. And the researcher said, yes, indeed. It's actually better fit for creating a pattern based on your existing knowledge and feeding the world to you. It doesn't do very well with truly diverse groups. Now, monocultures, it does well. If I only participate with white males of a certain age and we get into that group thing, it can spot us and create a pattern that is consistent across there. But the more we build in diverse culture, the less AI can have a chance for overcoming that. And so that, to me, is one of the things that we need to be focusing on. I think AI will bring a lot as long as we really true have senses of community and diverse community. And diverse community for me takes a whole other types of set of skills that computers I don't think can figure out anytime soon. That's not to say that they won't exactly figure it out at one time, but at least not in any time that we have to. And so I think one of the things I've learned from this, that in order to, if I'm trying to figure out how to be human in an AI world, that the most important thing that we could do is just learn how to be human first. And I mean truly human within a group of others. Thank you so much. And we can take questions. We want to just briefly. Yeah.
Thank you, Curt. Thank you. Am I on? Yes, good. Thank you so much, Curt. I feel more intelligent already. Excuse me. And we do have a little bit of time if people would like to share some questions, thoughts, reflections, resonations, things like that. We will have a little bit of opportunity both here in the room to share. And of course, as we know, folks on Zoom can share. I guess I'll start by saying that, yes, artificial intelligence is already beginning to make its entry into my field of work, which is I work in the privacy space. And so we hear a lot of concerns around artificial intelligence. You raised them today about how artificial intelligence is going to invade our privacy. But as a person whose job is protecting people's privacy, I am finding that artificial intelligence is actually finding those places where I should, as a privacy person, where I should be looking. He's looking over my shoulder. I keep looking over. I feel like someone's looking over my shoulder.
That's AI.
That's AI. They can't see on Zoom that I've got Elvis over here looking over my shoulder.
Can be intimidating.
The point is that, right, I think artificial intelligence maybe is what we make of it. Now, I'll say it's made my job harder because it is finding all of these places and people that I have to interview. You know, it goes through millions and millions of lines of data and says, look at this line of data. Why was this person looking? What was this click in the computer? And I'm the person who has to track it down. So at least currently, I don't want to say my job is safe, right? I mean, it's actually creating a lot more work for me. At some point, then perhaps it does say, oh, well, we don't need you. We know why that click happened. And, you know, we'll just cut you out of the thing. But I guess what I'm saying is artificial intelligence to some degree is what we make of it. Is that any thoughts on that, Curt? Or
well, it's a tool like any other tool. The challenge that Yuval Harari and others say in their book is that what will happen with the skills that we have. We went to school and learned to do a job, and then we got to do that job and build some prosperity. Our children, they say, will not be able to do that. In fact, children will completely have to reinvent themselves with new tasks because as things be able to fill in the gap. And so, yes, it's a tool and it is what we make it, but it's also now, in a way, a competition, a competitor, and we also have to figure out how to stay ahead of the game.
excellent, thank you. Any other people care to share, ask questions? We have, oh, Nadesh, sure. Here, let me give you the microphone. Whoops, is it on? Let me make sure it's on for you. Nope.
I heard someone say this week that most problems in society can be solved by education. And it really resonated with me. And I keep asking myself whether artificial intelligence will contribute to dumbing us down as a society, or whether it will contribute to us knowing more.
And I think that's one of the big questions that I've encountered is, you know, when we were kids, we would do long math and then people had figured out how to use slide rules and stuff. And now we have computers and Excel and things like that. When I'm teaching math to young adults, they're not used to using that kind of long permutation method. They say, why do I need to know this if I've got a computer that can already answer the question? And then, but the problem with that, of course, is that math itself is a way of reframing the brain. But if the world is moving at such a rapid pace that youth have these tools, like we have tools that can solve us a problem, do I need to learn that or not? I think the question about education is a major one, right? What is the type of education that was going to be needed? How rapidly is it going to happen? But what the researchers are saying, at least the researchers I've read, and that's a confirmation bias, he said AI is moving at a rapid technology that the youth of the future, it's not just learning one skills, it's learning these other kind of how to reinvent themselves. And do they really need to learn to kind of, we have to start at the beginning saying, oh, here's how to do programming and here's how to do this kind of stuff. Or do they just pick up the computer and solve these problems and reach a much higher level? So it's hard to say that. And welcome for people who know more about that to answer that. You got others.
Thank you. We do have a hand raised on Zoom, and I'm going to go over to Zoom right now and invite David Bland to unmute and ask your question.
Okay. Thank you. One of the things I've observed in all of these debates and analyses about AI is that we really focus on the problems and the biases of the AI systems, sometimes more than whereas we sometimes ignore the similar and perhaps worse biases in people. So, one of the really controversial areas is facial recognition software, which is amazing, astonishing even, but also has a lot of biases. In many cases, it's been shown to do a worse job with people of color than with white people because it's tended to be trained on more photographs of white people. But people look at that because they really focus that, and it can be quantified very easily. But we don't do the same thing with biases in facial recognition of people. It's harder to get that data, harder to quantify it. May even be doing a worse job. It's just an observation I've had, and not really a question, but I think in a lot of areas, we really need to focus similar critical thinking in comparing what the AI systems do to what people do, and whether people may still be doing a worse job. That's my comment.
Thank you, David. We have a hand over here, Jerry, and then Mark.
The question I have is, what do we don't know that we need to know?
And I think that's a good question, because if we do have biases and we can't see those things, we would never be able to answer the question. Whereas an AI system could spot patterns without even naming it, saying that this is a pattern that you have as a biological species, living in this area at this time, using this technology.
Thank you. Mark, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to make an observation. There's the opposing side to the idea of the AI dumbing people down and lowering their attention spans. There's like the opposite side, that the society and the science and the knowledge is becoming more and more complex. So you're getting this, this two-sided equation. It's not just people becoming more and more naive and having less of an ability to focus, but the actual knowledge that's being generated in the scientific and in academia and the complexity of the world that we're living in is getting greater and greater. So that makes it even more ominous, actually, because if you had the systems that we have now, like 300 years ago or 500 years ago with a less of attention span, it wouldn't matter as much because there wasn't as much knowledge. So if you go back 3,000 years, everybody, or, before they had geometry, it wouldn't really matter if a lot of people's attention spans were lower because there wasn't that much to know. So it's really having a profound effect in that regard.
Thank you, Mark. Do we have any other comments, questions on Zoom? No, we have another comment here. 2 comments in the room.
Thank you. I think based on my very, very, very limited exposure to AI, that what AI is very good at is scraping all the information that is out there much better than I can. But what it's not good at is innovating is finding out new information. And to a certain extent, it really is a very, very glorified and effective plagiarism machine, basically. And is my impression at all valid, or is AI really capable of innovating, inventing, seeing things in a new way? And if not, how does it? How can our reliance on AI in any way bring us to a new place, to new understandings?
And scientists would disagree. There's a difference between large language models like ChatGPT and things like that, which a lot of us use, can actually, right, it's basically data scraping and it's pulling things together and rewording it in ways that are consistent with rules around grammar and formalization of standard kind of rhetoric and those kinds of stuff. But scientists are using AI to discover things that they didn't even know were possible or to exist. So it is innovating. In fact, AI is now being used to train AI. So because it can process at such a fast speed that its computers are basically talking to other people. And if I'm in a business to manufacturing, what would I want to know? Well, I want to say or listen to what it's doing and its capacity to find new metals, new forms, new all these things. If you just read the science journals, it's exploding right now with trying to keep up with the types of information that's fun. And then people just figuring out how to make this work. Now, this will all continue, of course, until it sucks up every last bit of water needed to cool the systems and the great thing collapses, at least in California. But at this point, you drive, if you go to Silicon Valley, and it's very unique for me to go there. Like I said, it's a very different kind of group of people. It's just industry upon industry upon industry upon industry. And all these people show up at the ethical sides, they're all in the industry. And they all basically say, nope, it's not looking too good. It's these things, Harari in his book says it's no longer to be between a class struggle. It's going to be between those who have access to data and technology and those who are irrelevant, is what he says in his book, because they're no longer be needed. They're not smart enough. They can't do the math. They're not hooked into computers. They don't have access to ASI. They will never be able to compete. And he says that's the problem we have to solve, is how do we make sure humans are relevant to the future of technology rather than irrelevant? And that's his main in his book. Yeah, yikes. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got Jim, and then we've got another person on Zoom. And I think that's probably going to be maybe the last that we'll have time for. Go ahead, Jim.
I come
Speak into it.
I come from a science